Hey there and welcome back. I wanted to create a quick walkthrough video showing you the, at least in my opinion, most important features that the newest Payload version 3 brings with it. So the main thing that is different from version 2 is that Payload is now a native NextJS app, which means that it uses things like the app router or NextJS route handlers to provide its functionality. And it also makes it super easy to actually make it work together with a NextJS frontend. To show you what I mean, let's say I want to create a new project for a simple blog website that should be powered by Payload CMS and should run on NextJS in a frontend. I just have to go to my terminal and go into the folder that I want to create my project in. And now I'm just going to say npx create payload app. I have to say at beta right now because it's still the beta release. So now I'm asked, how should I name this project? I'm going to say my first blog. There's only one template right now. As soon as Payload will hit the stable release, there will be more templates like the e-commerce template or maybe blog template. For now, there's just a blank template, so I'm going for that. I'm going to choose MongoDB as a database. Just going to use the local database for now. And now we just have to wait for Payload to set up the project and install the dependencies. All right, now all dependencies have been installed. So I'm going to cd into my first block. Just going to open up VS Code. Yes, I do trust the authors. And the first thing that I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to replace my MongoDB URI because I want to deploy it later. So this is a MongoDB Atlas server URL that I can access from my deployed version. Obviously, it will not work with any local MongoDB database. So this is it. We now have a standard NextJS project with Payload initialized in it. And it's basically front-end and back-end, everything within the same repo. So what I could just do, I can just, in the app folder, I can just create a layout.jsx or .tsx file and just get started building my front-end with NextJS. So obviously, if you don't want to use NextJS for your front-end, you prefer Astro, Remix, whatever, you can still do that and you can still run Payload standalone as a backend, just how you could do it with version 2.0. But if you're using NextJS and you're using Payload, you can put everything into one repository, and that is a game changer for small website projects because not only is everything a lot simpler, but you can also deploy the backend for free, more or less, on Vercel. The first thing that I want to show you is how easy it is to set up Tailwind CSS in Payload. In version 2.0, this took a little bit of work. Now it is super easy. So what we can do is, let's just add a custom component. So I'm just going to create another folder, components, test component. It's just a normal React component. Hey, this is a custom component. And I'm going to style it with Tailwind CSS. So I'm going to say background green 500, padding 4, text green 100. I'm also going to add it to the user's configuration as an UI field. Name, test, type UI. And I'm going to add it as a field. Just have to import it. So if I go ahead and start my server now by running npm run dev, and if I go into users, obviously I'll have to create my user first. I should see my component, but it's not styled. So let's add Tailwind CSS. There is a installation guide for NextJS. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this command here. I'm going to go back, paste it in here. When this is installed, I will have to do a little bit of hacking. We will have to rename the post.css file from JS to CJS, and we have to do the same thing with the Tailwind config file. And also we have to replace export default with module.exports equals in both files, because otherwise we will get an error with ESM. The last thing that we have to do here, obviously we need to adjust our content in the Tailwind config file. So I'm just going to paste it in here since we're using the source folder. And then we just have to create our global CSS file and add it to our project. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, in our app router, I'm going to create a file, globals.css. I'm going to paste our imports here. And now I just have to create our layout file. This is the root layout for our Next.js app. And if you need the boilerplate code for a root layout, you can find it in the migration guide from the pages to the app router. So I'm just going to copy it in here. You will find both links in the description. I'm going to paste it in here. And if we restart our server and go back to our component, it's already updated. And it should have our styling here. Actually, it doesn't have any styling because I forgot one very important thing. Obviously, we'll have to import our global CSS file in our root layout. Otherwise, it won't be applied. Now, we get an error, cannot find module Tailwind CSS. So when I was installing Tailwind CSS, I actually got an error that it couldn't resolve the dependency tree because the one thing wanted the canary 7, the other one wanted canary 9 or something. So I'm just going to reinstall Tailwind CSS using legacy pure deps, npm install Tailwind CSS. That should do the trick. So let's restart. And now, as you can see, it works like a charm. The next thing that I want to show you, which is a huge improvement in developer experience, is hot module reloading. So in version 2.0, if you edit the payload configuration, so for example, if we edit our users collection config, you would always have to restart your server and wait for nodemon to actually restart it, which takes, I don't know, between 10 and 50 seconds, depending on your project. So the cool thing now is if I add, let's say, a description, make it a rich text, label, description, okay? If I go back to my project, it appears here. It's instant. So what you can basically do is you can edit your configuration real time without having to wait for anything. So I'm going to add another field, name, whatever, age, type number, I'm going to say admin, and it will be positioned in the sidebar. So I save it, I go back to my, okay, yeah, I messed something up here. I save it, I go back to my page. Okay, now I had to reload because it was an error. I can see my age appear here. Now, if I remove this thing again, save it, it disappears. This is amazing. The next thing that is new is React Server components. So now in version 3.0, all custom components are actually server components by default. I can show it to you by going into my test component and saying test set test is use state. And now I'm getting an error saying I can't use state because obviously it can only happen on a client. So if I want to turn this into a client component, I can just use client as with every normal component in Next.js. So now this is a client component. So here's the cool part about server components. We can now directly fetch data from Payload or from any third-party API in our server component. What I mean by that is I can turn it into an async function. And now here I can get the payload object by calling get payload HMR and passing it the config, the payload config that I can import from at payload config. And now with that payload object, I can basically just call the local API directly from my component. So I can say const users equals await payload dot find collection users. And then I can use this data in my component directly. So here I'm going to say h3 users, I'm going to create a div flex gap2. In here I'm just going to map the users, so users dot docs dot map, and for every user I'm going to return a div with, let's say, the user email. Obviously I still have to add the await keyword because this function is async as well. So let's go back to our page. And as you can see, it shows me all the users. The huge difference is that before that, when we were using client components, the component was rendered. It had to fetch the data again, and then it had to show it. So it had a lot of layout shift, a lot of delays. While I refresh the page, it's here, no loading time. This is also super handy if we have a third-party API that we have an API key for. So let's say we want to fetch the weather from a weather API key, from a weather API, and we don't want to expose the API key to the client. So in this case, in the previous version, we would have to create a custom endpoint, then fetch the data from the custom endpoint, and the custom endpoint would then go to the weather API, fetch the data, and you would have this sort of two-step process. Now it's just one step. It is also super cool if you want to fetch data on your website frontend. So let's go back to our blog example. I'm just going to create another collection called blog articles. I'm going to keep it very simple for now. Just fields, title, and description, which will just be a text area for now to keep it simple. So let's add it to our config here. So the cool thing now is, boom, the collection just appears. We don't have to restart anything. It just works. So let me create, obviously that was dumb. I just created an empty blog article. So there are no fields appearing here, which is because I just had a typo in here. So it's called fields. I go back, fields are here. So I'm just going to say, hey, title, first blog article. This is my first article. I'm going to create two more. second one, and I'm going to create a third one as well. All right, now I have 3 blog articles. So let's just create a very simple homepage. For that, I'm just going to create a page.jsx file in the app router. Going to give it a small hero section. So I'm going to say, welcome to my blog. So let's see how this looks. I can just check it out. Localhost 3000. All right, welcome to my blog. So now I want to have a section below that just shows the most recent 3 blog articles. So what I can do here is I'm going to create another component. I'm just going to put it in the same folder for now. Obviously, it makes sense to separate payload components from website components, but for the sake of simplicity, so I'm going to say recent blog posts, and this will be a server component. So what I can say here, I have the async function, and now I can start fetching data again. So once again, I'm going to say const payload equals await get payload HMR with the config. I'm going to import the config as well. I'm going to say blog posts equals await payload find collection blog articles. Okay, it's called articles. And now I can just say h2 recent blog articles grid. Going to give it 3 grid columns with a gap of 10. Now I'm going to map through the docs, and for every post I'm going to return the title and the description. Obviously it doesn't have an underscore ID, just an ID. I'm going to say rounded large. So let's see if this already works. Yeah, perfect. As you can see, we now have fetched our blog articles directly from the Payload API, which is basically going directly to the database. No REST queries, whatever. Super fast, super easy. Last but not least, I wanted to show you how easy it is to deploy this project on Vercel. So I created a repository here. I'm just going to link my local one to this. I'm just going to push all my changes. Yes, stage everything. I still have to configure something. All right, I committed all my changes to the repository. Now I'm going to Vercel. I'm going to create a new project. I'm selecting my first block, going to click on import. I still have to add my environment variables, which is the database URI and the payload secret. I can just copy and paste it into the fields here. And now I'm just going to, all right, and this won't let me deploy it with my personal account. So I just had to switch to my other one as well. Now I click on deploy and let's wait for a few seconds. After waiting for around 3 minutes, my PC switched to dark mode, but also our project has successfully been deployed to Vercel. Now if we check it out, as you can see, this is our homepage, our blog page. And if we now go to admin, we also have the payload admin panel. Now, if you open the admin panel, for the first time, there are cold starts. Okay, so that's more or less the only downside if you deploy Payload on Vercel, that if you just open it up the first time, it will take a couple of seconds until it loads. However, as soon as you've loaded it, so I'm just going to log in right now, it's actually super quick. So it doesn't take a cold start for every single route in this case, but rather just once, more or less. If you closed it, if you're coming back to it, then it has those cold starts. So apart from that, as you can see, we have everything in our AppNet panel here. We have our block deployed. Very simple, very straightforward. And that will basically be it for this video. If you're interested in more technical details, Payload actually has a great video in their official channel going more into depth about the technical changes. So I will link to it in the description below. If you do have any questions about it, if you want to see us cover any topics you would be interested in, specifically for 3.0 as well, we have a lot of content planned. But if there's anything special, just let us know in the comments. And apart from that, take care and see you in the next video.